Hey guys, welcome back. This is our English Civil War and Glorious Revolution lecture. This is SOL 6C. All right, let's take a look. So just a few terms to be aware of here, some concepts that we're going to talk about. When we talk about political democracies, we talk about governments that get their power from the consent, that's permission of the governed, that's the people. So government gets power from the people. All right, this is different. We just talked about Louis the 14th. Louis the 14th, the Sun King, says that his power is derived from God, that he has the divine right to rule. Now we're going to see in England the suggestion that no, the king is a man just like anybody else. And that's a big rejection of that great chain of being that's really been a big part of European governments since their conception. So the Ancien regime and the great chain of being are being challenged by these developments. All right. A few things to be aware of. So there are some basic English rights that already exist. There's the idea of a trial by a jury. There's the Magna Carta, where the king's got to share some power with Parliament. It limits the king's power. And then common law, which is developed by judges. So like a judge makes a decision which sets a precedent, which determines decisions made by later judges. So they'll look at previous rulings by judges when they make their decision. So the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution prompt a further development of the rights of Englishmen. This is going to lead to the creation of the English Bill of Rights in 1689. Okay, so this is Charles I. He is the son of James I, and he does not like Parliament. He does not like sharing power with Parliament. He dissolves many rights and laws Parliament passes, and he's trying to take away power from Parliament. How does this make Parliament feel? Well, not so good. Charles I ends up being the first king to be publicly tried and executed. So they actually, and by the way, Charles I was a big spender, wasted lots of money. So did James I, of course. But Charles I is publicly executed. So this sends shockwaves throughout Europe, right? All right. So, this disagreement regarding Charles I ignites the English Civil War. So, in 1642, you have supporters of Charles I aligned against opponents of Charles I. So you have people that are loyal to Charles, and they're your royalists or your cavaliers. And then you have Puritan supporters of Parliament, and these are the Roundheads. They call them Roundheads because you could probably guess, like, these guys are kind of well-to-do. They have means. Whereas the supporters of Parliament are more of your lower-class common folk who could not afford to grow their hair long and, be all fancy. So they cut their hair really short, hence the name Roundheads. All right. The war boils down to Parliament versus the king. Okay. All right. So Charles I, the English Civil War, and we'll look at Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell is leading the opposition to Charles I. He's the general of those Roundheads, that Puritan army. He ultimately defeats the Cavaliers and helps the Puritans win. Charles I is captured. All right. In 1649, Charles I is tried for treason against Parliament. Now here, this is something interesting to think about. Actually, convicting somebody of treason in England historically has been convicting someone of crimes against the king. So can we try Charles I for crimes against himself? Well, it depends. Think about it. If you think of Charles I's seat as king as a responsibility more than a right, then sure, Charles I has a responsibility to the people of England. He didn't fulfill that responsibility, and so he committed crimes against the office or the throne of the king, if you will. That's just one take on it. So he committed treason against Parliament, and his head was chopped off. All right, Oliver Cromwell will become kind of like a military dictator. He's going to end up seizing Ireland, and Northern Ireland, even today, remains part of the UK. And we'll talk about some of the issues that have that happened in Ireland and Northern Ireland later. He establishes a commonwealth, which is a republican form of government. He favors religious toleration for all Christians except Catholics. Okay, and the government he established collapsed quickly after his death. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Charles II. All right, so Charles II becomes king after Cromwell. The English people are looking for a little normality, so they restore the monarchy in England. This is known as the Restoration. He passes the Habeas Corpus Act, and this is really important. It essentially says you can't, well, he doesn't pass it, Parliament passes it, I should say. You can't arbitrarily arrest and confine someone. Kings have done this for a long time. If you have an opponent, somebody you don't particularly like, you can just lock them in a tower or a dungeon somewhere, and then they're no longer going to bother you. This act says that you cannot arrest somebody arbitrarily, and you can't hold them indefinitely. They have to go on trial and all that good stuff. Charles II has no rightful heir, so he has no legitimate child. All right, so there's no heir to the English throne except James II, his brother, who was Catholic. Why is that an issue? All right, think about some of England's enemies, and like especially France, you know, and think about the history that England has with Catholicism and why a Catholic king is going to be a little bit of an issue. All right, so let's talk a little bit about James II. All right. All right, political parties formed when Charles II died and James II took the throne. You had Whigs who were opposed to James. You had Tories who supported James. These are the ancestors of the first political parties in England. All right, James II, at least outwardly, appeared to be Catholic, and he appointed Catholics to high office. A lot of English people got upset about this. All right, and so they openly invite Mary and her Dutch husband, William of Orange, to take over England. They're like, hey, come on in, the time is right, kick this guy off the throne and take over. So Mary is the daughter of James II, but she's Protestant. She's married to the Dutch William of Orange. He's Prince of the Netherlands. And they're invited by Parliament to overthrow James II, to restore Protestantism to England. So they do that. William leads an army to London to fight James II, but guess what? It doesn't come to that because James gets the heck out of there. He's like, nope, I'm out. Not today. Okay, and so it's really kind of somewhat of a bloodless revolution. That is the Glorious Revolution. All right, so it is the bloodless overthrow of James II and return England to Protestantism one more time. Okay, parliamentary power increases. Parliament is a legislature, a law-making body. In Virginia, our Virginia General Assembly is a legislature, a body of lawmakers. Our Congress is our national legislature. Parliament is the national legislature for Britain. All right, so that increases legislative power. Parliament becomes more powerful. The monarchy becomes less powerful. William and Mary recognized Parliament as a partner in governing. England becomes a constitutional monarchy. So the English people reject absolutism, even though France was going the other way. Hey, guess what? Absolutism in France is about to go away too. More on that in our next lecture. So William and Mary come. There's the bloodless, glorious revolution. We get the English Bill of Rights in 1689. Parliament becomes a partner with the king. We get a constitutional monarchy. So big things are changing. So in 1689, with the English Bill of Rights, the goal was to make it clear that the king or queen's power was limited. Rulers could never suspend Parliament's laws. They couldn't levy taxes without a grant from Parliament. They could not inhibit freedom of speech in Parliament. And they couldn't penalize a citizen who petitions the king about grievances. All right, so if people complained or criticized you, you couldn't throw them in jail. All right. The English Civil War was a conflict between Parliament, and remember they're supporters of the Roundheads, they couldn't afford to get haircuts, and Royalist supporters or Cavaliers. This war led to the execution of King Charles I. Oliver Cromwell led the Roundheads and took over after Charles I. After Cromwell dies, he has no heirs. So Charles II, remember that's the son of Charles I, restores the monarchy. When Charles II dies, he has no heir. So James II takes over. James II is Catholic. His supporters were called Tories, and his opponents were called Whigs. Parliament hated James II. They asked for his daughter, Mary, a Protestant, and her husband, William of Orange, to come to England and take over. They agree. James II gets the heck out of there. It goes to France. We have the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary, which, by the way, the school is named after, put the English Bill of Rights into place and limit their own power. Big deal. All right, guys, that concludes our English Civil War and Glorious Revolution lecture. Make sure you guys fill out the guided notes, do the discussion board, and answer the chapter questions. And I'll see you next